Hi there. I trust you did well in the last test, and just remember that you can review these sessions as many times as you want to get the most out of each of the session's content. So, continuing our studies with the 2-5-1 progression, I'd now like to show you some examples of creating bass lines using intervals to follow the harmonic structure of this chord progression. And also in the process, I'm going to get you reading and understanding musical notation. To begin with, let's recall a 2-5-1 progression in the key of G major. So for the first examples, the chord sequence will look like this. Now, one of the strongest ways to spell out the sound of any chord sequence, and something I suggest you try whenever possible in your playing, is creating bass lines using the roots and thirds of a chord. So, as our first chord in the sequence is an A minor 7th, we'd simply use a minor third interval here like this. The 5 chord, which is a D dominant 7th, has a major third, so quite simply just recall the shape on the fingerboard. And finally, similar to the D 7th, our tonic chord of G major 7th also has a major third played using the same shape like this. Okay, before we play this idea along with the accompaniment, let's have a look at what we're going to play written down in musical notation. As you can see, this is a vamp made up of 4 bars of music. These symbols at the start and at the end of the exercise are open and closed repeat marks, and simply mean that when we get to the end of the 4 bars, we go back to the open repeat mark and play the 4 bars again. So basically, we're playing 8 bars in total. The top line, or stave as it's known in music, contains standard notation for a bass guitar. And we know this because it's marked with this symbol here, which means bass clef. Now, it's important to note that this bass clef stave contains both lines and spaces. And as you can see, the notes move vertically up and down to occupy these lines or spaces on the stave, dependent on their pitch. If you'd like to refresh your knowledge of notes in the bass clef, then I strongly suggest having a look at our separate music theory lessons whenever it suits you. Now, most of you will probably be much more familiar with and recognise the lower stave. It's a shorthand way of writing down and reading music called tablature, or tab for short. You'll notice that unlike the bass stave above, there are 4 lines, one for each of the open strings on the bass shown here. Instead of notes, numbers are written on the lines to tell you which fret to play, so you can easily see things laid out before you attempt to play them. Looking at the first note, for example, we can see that it's played on the E string at fret 5, which is the note of A. Looking directly above the tab, you can see that this note of A is written on the bass stave like this, occupying the space between the first 2 lines. Also, you'll notice this sharp symbol here in the second bar. This symbol tells us to play this note and any other note occupying the same place on the stave during the same bar as a sharp note. In this case, the note of F sharp, which hopefully you recognise as the major third of a D7 chord. The chords of this sequence, which you'll recognise as belonging to a 2-5-1 in G major, are written in above the bass clef stave and show us where the harmony is changing, in this example on the first beat of every bar. So, let's try reading this and playing along with the accompaniment. Don't forget the repeat marks and make sure your crotchets or quarter notes are played accurately and on every beat of the bar. After 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. One of the main reasons why I like to use thirds, whether major or minor, is that they really spell out the harmony of the chord. I mean, after all, when you strip chords back to their bare bones, they're either major or minor, so this technique is always a good starting point in creating any bass line. Okay, let's use the same chord progression but change the feel. This time we're going to play a driving eighth note or quaver pattern like this, but still playing the thirds of the chords each time. In this exercise, get used to reading ahead and be careful in the last bar, as there are 2 crotchets or quarter notes to be played on beats 2 and 4 each time we repeat. So, after 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Staying with the same feel, let's work on this idea melodically. Now, when you create bass lines of your own, you've got 2 main elements to work with: rhythm and pitch. And just make sure you're using each of these elements to the best of their ability. That last exercise sounded okay, but to my ears it didn't really sit with the accompaniment that well, as there was too much emphasis on the thirds of each chord. So here's our next exercise, and notice how I've gone back to the root of the chord, only letting the thirds last for an eighth note or quaver each time. Also, look out for the last bar, as this time I've added a G major arpeggio to round off the 4-bar idea. As we play this, hopefully you'll notice the bass line anchors itself to the root notes in a much better way, yet still managing to hint back to the harmony each chord carries, as we're still using the thirds, but this time not as much. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let's change key and musical style completely now. Here's a 2-5-1 progression, this time in F major, and I'm going to create a bass line with a country feel. To do this, all I'm going to use are the roots and fifths of each chord, and it creates a melodic pattern very much associated with country, folk and reggae. Hopefully you can see that each of the chord types in a major 2-5-1 all contain perfect fifths of part of their chord tones, so I'm just going to alternate between the root and a low fifth of each chord on every beat of the bar. As you can see from the tempo mark here, this exercise is going to be a little quicker. So, after 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, there's nothing wrong with that at all, but in this next exercise I'd like to embellish this idea a little further, in an attempt to get away from its very repetitive nature. I'm still using roots and fifths of each chord, but as you can see I've changed the pitch of them in each bar. In the first bar I'm playing the fifth above the root note like this, whereas I change in the second bar to play them the other way around. Also breaking up the idea and lead it back to the repeat again, I've included a run starting in the second half of the last bar and played using eighth notes or quavers. As the chord accompanying us at this point is an F major 7th and is the tonic chord, the run is just part of an F major scale, starting from the octave here and descending to the 5th like this. This time by making use of and incorporating our knowledge tastefully within a musical situation like this, we can create bass lines to really support what's going on around us, while still making our ideas sound fresh and exciting to the listener. So, ready to play? After 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You see, in one lesson, not only have I got you understanding and reading notation, but also I've hopefully inspired you to want to go ahead and create bass lines of your own. To help with this, I've put all the grooves used today at the end of this session for you to practice some of the ideas and concepts I've shared with you. In this session, we've mainly been using the intervals associated with each chord. But in the next session, we'll be taking these concepts a stage further and using the modes of Dorian, Mixolydian and Ionian to build bass lines that use both chord and scale tones in some different musical genres. I'll see you there.